The bell for seventh period had a different sound. It wasn't the sharp, frantic ring that sent students scrambling to calculus or chemistry. This was a lower, almost melodic tone that signaled the end of the official school day and the beginning of the Kensington Prep Legacy Gala setup. For most students, it was a cue to grab their bags and clear out, leaving the halls to the event planners and the handful of club members tasked with hanging banners. For one student, however, the sound was a knot tightening in her stomach. She moved through the mostly empty hallway, a stack of heavy library books balanced in her arms like a shield. Her name was Elena, and her preferred world was one of quiet order, of facts stacked neatly like the books she carried. The gala, with its buzz of wealthy alumni and performative school spirit, was the antithesis of that world. It was a spectacle, and Elena had no desire to be part of the audience, let alone the show. Her plan was simple: deposit the books, weave through the back staircase to avoid the growing chaos in the main foyer, and be on the 3:15 bus. Home tea and the dense, comforting prose of her history textbook awaited. It was a good plan. A safe plan. It evaporated the moment she turned the corner near the school's auditorium. Elena! Oh, thank goodness. The voice was a high-pitched flurry of stress. Mrs. Albright, the event coordinator, descended upon her. Mrs. Albright was usually a portrait of crisp efficiency, but today her normally perfect bun was fraying, and her glasses were perched on top of her head. She looked like a general whose key soldier had just deserted. "You have to help me," Mrs. Albright said, her hands fluttering. "It's a disaster. A total disaster." Elena shifted the books, buying a second to think. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Albright?" "Okay? No, nothing is okay. It's the soloist. For the gala. You know Anya, the senior? The brilliant soprano? The centerpiece of our musical interlude?" Mrs. Albright's words tumbled out. "She has it. The terrible flu that's going around. She can't speak a word, let alone sing Puccini. She's at home, wrapped in blankets, drinking honey tea. We have no performance. The program has a 15-minute hole right before the headmaster's speech. A hole." Elena felt a pang of sympathy for Anya, and a larger pang of dread for where this might be going. "That's terrible," she said, trying to inject her voice with enough finality to continue her walk to the library. "It's catastrophic," Mrs. Albright corrected. But then I remembered. Mrs. Henderson, in the history department, she mentioned it in the teacher's lounge last week. She said you used to play the piano. Quite seriously, she said. The floor beneath Elena's feet seemed to tilt slightly. That part of her life was a closed book, one she had shelved in the furthest, darkest corner of her mind. It belonged to a time before Kensington Prep, before the quiet girl with the library books. It belonged to the time with her mother. It was a long time ago, Elena said, her voice quieter than she intended. "I don't really play anymore." "But you can," Mrs. Albright insisted, latching on to the statement like a lifeline. "That's the important part. You can read music. You can sit at a piano and make coherent, pleasant sound come out of it. That's all we need." Elena shook her head, already backing away. "I'm really not the person for this. There are music students. The jazz band pianist at a statewide competition today." Mrs. Albright moaned. "Everyone else is either unprepared or completely unreliable. Elena, please. I am begging you. It doesn't have to be a concert. It's just ambience, elegant background music while the guests finish their desserts and mingle. Something simple, beautiful, and utterly uncomplicated." The plea was painted with sheer desperation. Elena looked at Mrs. Albright's worried face, at the frantic energy vibrating off her. She thought of the headmaster's displeasure, of the gala being marred by a last-minute cancellation. She was a problem solver by nature. Her academic success was built on fixing complex equations and untangling historical narratives. Here was a real-world problem with a very simple, if terrifying, solution. What? What would I have to play? The question escaped before she could stop it. Mrs. Albright's face lit up with hope. Something foolproof. Something everyone knows and no one really listens to. Pachelbel's canon in D4 chords, repeating. It's the definition of pleasant background music. You could play it in your sleep. Elena knew it. Of course she knew it. It was one of the first pieces she'd learned to play with both hands as a child, her small feet dangling a foot above the pedals. The memory was a soft, sudden ache. She pushed it down. I don't have anything to wear, she offered, a last, feeble defense. Taken care of. Mrs. Albright chirped, sensing victory. Anya is about your size. Her performance dress is already here. A simple black dress. Very elegant. You'll look perfect. Elena was out of excuses. The weight of the library books in her arms felt insignificant compared to the heavy, cold dread settling in her stomach. She saw her quiet evening dissolving, replaced by the glare of stage lights and the pressure of unfamiliar eyes. Just Pachelbel's canon? She asked softly. Just the canon, Mrs. Albright confirmed, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. Start to finish, nice and slow. That's it. You'll be a ghost at the piano. A lovely musical ghost. No one will even notice you're there. That was the idea, wasn't it? To be unnoticed. To provide the solution without becoming part of the story. Elena took a deep, shaky breath. The part of her that hated to let people down, that was wired to fix broken things, won out over the part of her that was screaming to run. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll do it. Mrs. Albright nearly collapsed with relief. You are an angel. A lifesaver. Come, we have 2 hours. I'll show you the piano, give you the dress. You can practice a little, get a feel for it. Oh, you've saved the day. As Elena was steered away from the library and toward the buzzing auditorium, her mind was already racing. The simple, repeating chords of Pachelbel's canon looped in her head. It was mechanical. It was safe. She could play it with her eyes closed, focusing only on the keys, pretending the room beyond was empty. She would be a ghost. She repeated it to herself, like a mantra, as she walked into the bustling grand hall. Crews were setting up round tables with white cloths. The giant, gleaming Steinway grand piano sat on a low stage at the far end, looking less like a musical instrument and more like a sleeping beast. Her throat went dry. This was a mistake. Every instinct told her so. This piano, this room, this event, it was a world that had once been hers. A world that ended 5 years ago with a phone call and a long, silent drive home from a hospital. Music hadn't been background noise then. It had been a language, a storm, a comfort. Now it was just a forgotten skill, a party trick to be pulled out in an emergency. Mrs. Albright hustled her backstage and presented her with the dress. It was indeed simple and black, made of a soft, flowing material. As Elena changed in a small, cluttered storage room, she felt like she was putting on a costume. She wasn't a performer. She was a student, a reader, a girl who missed her mother. The girl in the mirror, with her hair hastily tucked behind her ears, and the elegant dress feeling alien on her frame, was a stranger. She sat at the piano when the room was empty, just for a moment. She lifted the fall board, revealing the familiar pattern of black and white keys. The scent of old wood and faint polish wafted up. Her hands, which had been trembling slightly, stilled as they hovered above the keyboard. Muscle memory, deep and dormant, tingled in her fingertips. She played the first 4 notes of the canon. They echoed in the empty hall, pure and clear. It was easy. Too easy. It was just sound. There was no heart in it, no story. Just notes in the right order that she decided was perfect. She would play the notes. She would be the ghost. She would get through this, and tomorrow, everything would go back to normal. She closed the piano lid, the soft thump final. The beast could sleep a little longer. For now, she just had to survive the evening. The grand hall of Kensington Prep had been transformed. The nervous energy of the afternoon setup was gone, replaced by a low, polished hum of conversation and the soft clink of fine glassware. Round tables, now dressed in crisp white linen and dotted with flickering candle centerpieces, filled the space. The air smelled of roasted herbs, expensive perfume, and the waxy scent of the hundreds of candles. It was a world of soft light and murmured wealth, a picture of everything Elena usually avoided. Standing in the shadow of the heavy stage curtain, she felt like she was watching a play from the wings. The black dress felt less strange now, but it still wasn't her. It was a uniform for a job she didn't want. She watched the guests' alumni in tailored suits, owners with gleaming watches, teachers trying to look relaxed. They moved in slow, confident circles, their laughter a gentle wave that rolled across the room. They were here to see and be seen, to network, to remember their glory days. The background music was just that, background. A sonic garnish, like the parsley on the edge of a dinner plate. Mrs. Albright appeared at her side, a tight, professional smile on her face. Perfect timing. They're just about to serve the dessert. The headmaster will do his thank yous in about 15 minutes. You'll start as the plates are being cleared. Remember, you're the bridge. Just gentle, lovely music to keep the mood warm. Elena just nodded, her throat too dry to speak. The simple instructions were a lifeline. Asterisk, be the bridge. Play the notes. Be a ghost. Asterisk. Break a leg, dear, Mrs. Albright whispered, though the sentiment felt oddly aggressive for the request. Then she was gone, sweeping off to greet an important-looking couple near the door. The stage manager, a student from the tech club with a headset, gave Elena a thumbs up. It was time. She walked to the Steinway, her steps silent on the thick carpet of the stage. The piano was a dark, glossy monolith under the soft spotlight. To the room, it was a piece of furniture. To her, in this moment, it felt like the edge of a cliff. She sat on the cool bench, adjusting it slightly. She opened the fallboard, the familiar expanse of black and white keys waiting. A few faces glanced her way, polite, fleeting curiosity, before turning back to their conversations. She was part of the scenery now, a living ornament. That was good. That was the plan. Taking a slow, deep breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart, she placed her hands on the keys. The first chord of Pachelbel's canon in D filled her ears, a sound so practiced it was like a reflex. She began to play. The notes were clean. They were precise. They were perfectly in time. She moved through the well-worn progression, her fingers finding their places without any conscious thought. It was music played by muscle memory alone. She kept her eyes fixed on her hands, on the point where her fingers met the ivory. She built a wall between herself and the room with that focus. The laughter, the clinking, the murmur of voices, it all became a distant ocean sound. And her piano was a small, isolated island. She played the 8 familiar notes of the bass line. Over and over, a musical heartbeat. Her right hand wove the simple, sorrowful melody above it. It was pretty. It was inoffensive. It was exactly what Mrs. Albright had ordered. A few people near the stage nodded along absently. An older alumnus smiled softly, perhaps lost in a memory the tune triggered. For most, it changed nothing. Forks still scraped against porcelain plates. Conversations about stock portfolios and summer homes continued without a pause. This was success. She was doing it. She was invisible. The tightness in her chest began, very slowly, to unwind. She could do this. She could play this loop 12 more times, take the final chord, and walk away. She allowed her eyes to lift, just for a second, from her hands. She scanned the room without really seeing faces, just a blur of color and movement. Then her gaze snagged. On the far wall, lit by its own small light, was the formal portrait of the school's founder, a severe-looking man from a century ago. He was famous for his speeches on discipline, structure, and the virtue of following a set path. His painted eyes seemed to stare right at her, across the years and across the crowded room. And just like that, the wall she had built crumbled. The repeating chords under her fingers no longer felt like a safe pattern. They felt like a cage. Each identical cycle was a bar. The simple, sweet melody was no longer pretty. It was thin, bloodless, a ghost of what music could be. She was playing notes written centuries ago by rote, without a single piece of herself in them. She was a machine, a very well-trained, very obedient player piano. A memory, vivid and sudden, crashed over her. Not of sheet music or practice drills. It was of a smaller, sunnier room. The carpet was warm, and dust motes danced in a beam of light. She was maybe 9, struggling with a difficult passage by Chopin, her small hands aching with the stretch. She had played the notes correctly, but it had sounded hollow, like a beautiful shell with nothing inside. Her mother, who had been listening from the kitchen, came and sat on the bench beside her. She didn't talk about fingering or tempo. She placed a warm hand over Alina's small, frustrated ones on the keys. "Lionok," she had said, her voice soft with her native accent. "Little lion, you are playing all the correct notes. But music, it does not live in the notes." She tapped Alina's chest, right over her heart. "It lives here, and it lives in the quiet space between the sounds. The notes are just the road. The feeling you have when you travel it, that is the journey. That is the story. You must tell me a story, my love. Not just show me the map." Back in the present, in the grand hall, Elena's fingers kept moving, playing the same 8 bass notes, the same rising melody. But inside, everything was churning. The memory was so sharp it was painful. She hadn't thought of that nickname in years. She hadn't let herself. She looked at her hands, mechanically walking the same safe, small path on the keyboard. She was showing them the map. A boring, well-trodden map to nowhere. And for what? To be a ghost? To honor a founder who valued conformity above all else? A spark ignited in her gut. It was small, hot, and fierce. It was defiance. It was grief. It was the sudden, unbearable need to speak, not just to make pleasant noise. The piece was nearing its final repetitions. She could coast to the end. The safe choice, the obedient choice, was right there. All she had to do was finish the loop. But the voice in her head, her mother's voice, was clearer now. "Tell me a story." As her left hand played the familiar last bass note of the sequence, she didn't let it resolve. Instead, she pressed the pedal down, letting the sound deepen and blur. Her right hand, almost of its own volition, drifted away from the Pachelbel melody. It hovered for a split second, a bird about to change direction in the wind. Then, with a decision that felt less like thought and more like falling, she began to play. Her left hand dropped down the keyboard, not to the familiar D, but to a lower, darker, more resonant note. It built a new foundation, one of deep, rumbling tension. Her right hand answered. It didn't play a sweet, Renaissance-era tune. It carved out a series of heavy, powerful, tolling chords that rang through the hall like a funeral bell. The safe, looping cage of Pachelbel was gone. In its place was something vast, stormy, and a live dot It was the beginning of Rachmaninoff's prelude in C-sharp minor. The first. Thunderous chords were a shock to the system her own. And the rooms. The polite murmur of conversation didn't just stop. It was severed. It was as if someone had suddenly cut the power to all other sound. Every single head turned toward the stage. Spoons, halfway to mouths, froze. A waiter pouring water halted, the stream glugging into the glass unnoticed. Elena didn't see them. She was gone. The spark had become a fire, and the fire was consuming every bit of her fear, her longing, her 5 years of silence. Her hands, once stiff with anxiety, now moved with a powerful, unleashed certainty. The music was no longer pretty. It was tragic. It was furious. It was a monument of sound, built from sorrow and sheer, breathtaking strength. She wasn't playing the piano anymore. She was pulling the storm out of it, pouring everything she had locked away into those deep, resonant bass notes and those crashing, cathedral-high chords. She was telling her story. The story of loss, of a quiet girl in a loud world, of a love that had been buried but not dead. And for the first time in years, she was not a ghost. She was completely, terrifyingly, brilliantly alive. The silence in the grand hall wasn't empty. It was full. It was a held breath, a pressure, a collective shock that had its own weight. That first, deep, tolling chord from the piano hadn't just been a sound. It had been an event. It had cut through the soft bubble of the party like a lightning strike splitting a quiet sky. For a second, maybe two, there was only that ringing chord, and the sight of the girl at the piano transformed. Her back was straight, not with stiffness now, but with a fierce, focused energy. Her head was bowed slightly, not in shyness, but in concentration, as if she was listening to something deep inside the music, deep inside herself. Her hands, which had moved with careful precision moments before, now seemed to command the keyboard. They weren't just touching the keys. They were drawing something massive out of them. Then, the music truly began to unfold. The thunderous opening gave way to a frantic, swirling storm of notes in the bass, a rumbling undercurrent of pure emotion. Over the top, her right hand carved out a melody that was at once heartbreakingly sad and powerfully defiant. This wasn't background music. This was a front and center, raw-nerved confession played out in sound. It was the sound of a struggle, of something beautiful fighting to exist against a crushing weight dot at a table near the front, an older alumnus. A man who ran a large investment firm and had spent the evening discussing market fluctuations, found his hand frozen around his brandy glass. He hadn't thought about classical music since he was forced to attend concerts as a boy. But this was different. This wasn't polite. It wasn't decorative. It reached into his chest with invisible hands and squeezed. He saw not a student playing a piece, but a person weathering a private, violent storm right in front of him. He forgot about his glass, the room, everything dot at the back, near the kitchen doors. The student tech manager with the headset stood utterly still. His job was to watch for cues, for problems. The cue for the headmaster's speech was completely forgotten. His mouth was slightly open. He was a film buff, and this felt like the moment in a movie when the hero finds their true power. He felt chills racing up his arms, a physical reaction to the sheer force of what he was hearing. Mrs. Albright, stationed by the entrance, felt all the color drain from her face. This was not Pachelbel's canon. This was not simple. This was not background. Her mind, trained on schedules and appearances, short-circuited. Her first instinct was horror. This was a deviation from the plan, a wild, unpredictable variable. She took half a step forward, as if to intervene, to somehow stop this unfolding spectacle. But she stopped. She looked at Elena. She saw the absolute absorption, the total lack of pretense or performance. This wasn't a girl showing off. This was a person who had been holding an ocean inside a teacup, and the teacup had just shattered. The raw honesty of it held Mrs. Albright in place. For the first time all evening, she wasn't seeing a problem to be managed. She was witnessing something real. Her professional panic was slowly, completely, overridden by a stunned, human awe. The music swelled, moving from its dark, powerful opening into a more lyrical, sorrowful middle section. The storm quieted, but the emotion deepened. The melody became a lament, a long, aching sigh that floated above the still churning bass. It was unspeakably beautiful, and it carried a weight of loneliness that seemed to touch everyone in the room. A teacher from the English department, a woman who taught poetry, felt her eyes well up with tears. She knew about Elena, the quiet, brilliant student who wrote impeccable essays but never spoke in class discussions. She had always wondered what was behind those watchful eyes. Now, she felt she was hearing the answer. This was the poetry the girl never spoke. It was all there in the rise and fall of the phrases, in the space between the notes. The teacher didn't wipe her tears away. She just let them fall, a silent tribute to the story being told. Elena was lost. The world of the grand hall, the candles, the faces, the very stage beneath her had melted away. There was only the geography of the keyboard and the landscape of the music. Her body moved with it, leaning into the deep chords, lifting slightly during the fleeting moments of melodic hope. Every ounce of her being was channeled into her fingertips. The fear was gone. The worry about what people thought was gone. Even the memory of her mother, which had sparked this, was no longer a separate thought. It had become the fuel for the music itself. She was playing from a place she hadn't visited in half a decade. It was a place of pure feeling, where technique and emotion weren't separate things, but one and the same. Her fingers remembered stretches and jumps they hadn't attempted in years, finding their way not because she was thinking, but because the music demanded it. It was like meeting an old, powerful part of herself in a dark room and recognizing her immediately. The piece built again, tension coiling tighter and tighter. The left hand's rumble became more insistent, the right hand's chords more dramatic. It was a climb up a mountain of sound. She could feel the energy in the room that held breath, pulling her forward. It wasn't judgment or expectation. It was a silent, collective urging. Asterisk, go on. Show us. Tell us. Asterisk, she reached the famous climax, the moment before the final release. Her hands flew across the keys in a cascading run, a waterfall of notes that tumbled down into the deepest, most resonant bass chords of the entire piece. The sound was immense, physical. It vibrated in the floorboards, in the glassware on the tables, in the chest of every single person listening. And then the resolution. The final powerful chords rang out, not as a happy ending, but as a statement of acceptance, of strength forged in sorrow. They were monumental. They were final. Her hands lifted from the keys and came to rest in her lap. The last chord hung in the air, fading slowly into a silence that was even deeper and more profound than the one that had preceded the storm. For a long moment, nothing happened. The girl sat at the piano, head still bowed, her body trembling slightly with the aftershock of the effort. She was coming back to herself, the real world seeping in at the edges of her awareness. She heard nothing. No clinking, no talking, no movement. A terrifying thought pierced her. Asterisk, I've made a terrible mistake. I've broken everything. Asterisk, then, a sound. It wasn't applause, not at first. It was a collective, shuddering exhale, as if 200 people had simultaneously remembered how to breathe. It was followed by a single, sharp gasp from somewhere in the middle of the room, and then the applause began. It didn't start as a polite patter. It erupted. It was a roar. It was the sound of the silence shattering into 1,000 pieces of pure, stunned admiration. People were on their feet, their chairs scraping back, their hands coming together not in duty, but in a visceral need to make noise in response to what they had just witnessed. The sound was overwhelming, a physical wave that hit the stage. Elena flinched, finally looking up. The sight made her dizzy. A sea of standing people, all facing her, all clapping, their faces etched with amazement, with tears, with smiles of pure wonder. She saw the English teacher wiping her eyes. She saw the stern-faced investor, still holding his brandy, applauding with slow, deliberate respect. She saw the tech kid jumping up and down a little by the door. His headset dangling. Her eyes found Mrs. Albright. The coordinator wasn't looking at her schedule. She was just clapping, her earlier horror replaced by an expression of dazed, proud shock. The applause didn't fade. It built. It washed over Elena, not as a pressure, but as a kind of absolution. She hadn't failed. She hadn't just played a piece. She had taken a room full of strangers on a journey, and they had followed her, willingly, into the heart of her storm. She didn't know how to be in this moment. So she did the only thing that felt right. She stood up on shaky legs, the simple black dress swirling around her. She gave one small, awkward nod to the room, not a bow of a performer, but an acknowledgement, a thank you for listening. The roar of the crowd swelled even louder. In that incredible, deafening sound, the quiet girl with the library books was gone. For this one moment, she was simply Elena, who had told her story. And the room had listened, captivated to the very last note. The applause was a warm, living thing. It didn't feel like noise. It felt like being wrapped in something solid and real. For Elena, standing there on the stage with her legs feeling like they were made of something other than bone, it was the strangest sensation. She had spent years building walls of quiet, of books, of careful invisibility. In 3 minutes, the music had knocked every single one of them down, and now this wave of sound was rushing into the space where they had been. It was terrifying, and it was wonderful. She couldn't process the faces. They were a blur of smiles and shining eyes. She gave one more small, uncertain nod, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to stop them from shaking. Then the instinct to flee, to find a quiet corner to understand what had just happened, took over. She turned and walked off the stage, the roar of the applause following her like a tide. Backstage was a cave of shadows and coiled cables after the bright stage lights. She leaned against a cool, concrete wall, pressing her palms flat against it. Her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could still feel the vibration of the piano's deepest notes in her fingertips, a phantom echo of the storm she'd just released. Elena. The voice was soft, a little shaky. It was Mrs. Albright. Elena turned, expecting to see the flustered, stressed coordinator from before, worried about the ruined schedule. The woman who stood there was different. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She wasn't holding a clipboard. For a long moment, she just looked at Elena, seeming to search for words. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with an emotion Elena couldn't quite name. "That was not Pachelbel's canon," she said, and then a small, watery laugh escaped her. I don't even know what to say. I thought you were just going to play the notes." Elena opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, but Mrs. Albright stepped forward and, to Elena's complete shock, pulled her into a quick, tight hug. It was over almost as soon as it began, but the gesture was so utterly unexpected, it left Elena even more unsteady. "Don't you dare apologize," Mrs. Albright whispered fiercely, as if reading her mind. That was the most real thing that has ever happened at one of these galas. Ever. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, her professional composure completely gone. "The headmaster's speech is going to sound very boring now," she added, And this time her smile was real. Before Elena could even think of a response, other people began to filter backstage. Teachers first. Her history teacher, the one who had mentioned her piano pass to Mrs. Albright, beamed with pride and gave her shoulder a squeeze. The English teacher who had cried just nodded at her, a look of deep understanding passing between them that needed no words. Then, a man she didn't know broke through the small crowd. He was older, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm presence that seemed to part the excited energy around him. He was accompanied by the headmaster, who looked both bewildered and immensely pleased. "Elena, this is Mr. Claiborne," the headmaster said, his voice booming with a new fondness. A very distinguished alumnus and the chair of the Renwick Music Conservatory's advisory board. Mr. Claiborne didn't offer a hand to shake immediately. He just looked at her, his gaze thoughtful and appraising, but not unkind. "Rachmaninoff," he stated. "The Prelude in C-sharp minor, a piece that eats talented students for breakfast. You didn't just play it. You communicated it." His voice was quiet, measured. "Where did you study?" The question was a bucket of cold water. It brought her crashing back to the past she'd sealed away. I had a teacher when I was younger, but I haven't played seriously in years. I don't study anymore." "That's evident," Mr. Claiborne said, and for a second Elena felt a sting of criticism. But then he continued, "What I heard wasn't a polished, practiced competition piece. It was raw. It had intention, a story. That is something a conservatory can refine, but it cannot teach. The technique is rusty, yes. The pedaling was a bit muddy in the middle section. But the soul of it—" He trailed off, shaking his head slightly as if still hearing it. "That was pristine." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. "My card. I am running a summer mentorship program at Renwick. It's for students who have something to say with their music, but who might not fit the traditional audition mold. We work intensely for 6 weeks. I think you would be an extraordinary candidate." He held the card out. Elena looked at it, then at his hand, not moving. The world was moving too fast. An hour ago, she was hoping to be a ghost. Now, a path was being laid at her feet, a path that led directly back to the life she had walked away from. Seeing her hesitation, Mr. Claiborne's expression softened. "You don't have to decide tonight, or even this month. The offer is there. What you did tonight, that is a gift, not just a skill. To hide a gift like that is a loss, for you and for anyone who could ever hear it." He placed the card gently on a nearby equipment case when she didn't take it. "Think about it." He gave a small, respectful nod to her, then to the headmaster, and melted back into the gathering crowd, leaving a pocket of quiet around Elena. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal haze. People she had never spoken to came up to offer congratulations. The star soprano, Anya, who was feeling better and had come to see the end of the event, found her and hugged her, whispering, "You made my being sick the best thing that could have happened." There was laughter and questions, and a constant hum of excitement that had her name in the center of it. Finally, she managed to slip away. She changed back into her own clothes in the storage room, the simple black dress now feeling like a costume from another life. She folded it carefully. As she stepped out into the cool, quiet night air, the silence was a relief. The parking lot was nearly empty. "Hey?" She turned. It was the tech manager, the one with the headset. He was shuffling his feet a little, looking suddenly shy. "I just wanted to say that was seriously the coolest thing I've ever seen. I mean, I run lights and sound for all the plays. That was better than any script." "Thanks," Elena said, and found she meant it. His reaction felt pure, uncomplicated by alumni agendas or career offers. No problem. he said, and then with a quick wave, he headed off towards the bike racks. She walked to the bus stop alone. The night was clear, the stars sharp pinpricks in the dark sky. The adrenaline was finally draining away, leaving a deep, trembling exhaustion in its place. But underneath the tiredness, something else was stirring. It was a small, warm ember in her chest. She sat on the bench, the business card from Mr. Claiborne now in her hand. She hadn't meant to pick it up, but her fingers had closed around it on her way out. She traced the raised lettering with her thumb. For 5 years, she had defined herself by a loss. Her music, her mother's world, was a room she had closed and locked. Tonight, she hadn't just opened the door. She had blown it off its hinges and shown everyone what was inside. And instead of finding a sad, empty shrine, they had seen something alive, something powerful, something that was still hers. The bus's headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter. She thought about the simple loop of Pachelbel's cannon, the safety of it. She thought about the terrifying, glorious plunge into Rachmaninoff's storm. She stood up as the bus approached. The ember in her chest glowed a little brighter. It wasn't a decision, not yet. It was just a feeling. The feeling that maybe, after all this time, the quiet girl and the girl who could make a piano speak with such a voice didn't have to be two different people. Maybe they could somehow learn to be the same person. She climbed onto the bus, dropped her fare into the box, and found a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away from the school, she looked down at the business card one last time before slipping it into her pocket. She didn't look back at the glowing windows of the grand hall. For the first time in a long time, she felt strangely, quietly forward. The days that followed the gala were the strangest of Elena's life. It was like she had stepped out of her own quiet story and into someone else's for a few minutes, and now she had to step back in. But the pages didn't fit together the same way anymore. At school on Monday, she braced herself. She expected whispers, stares, the uncomfortable feeling of being known for something. And it was there, a little. People in the halls would glance at her, then quickly look away with a small smile. A couple of students from her physics class she'd never spoken to gave her a thumbs up. But it wasn't the overwhelming attention she feared. It was more like a quiet, respectful acknowledgement. The world hadn't fundamentally changed. The bell still rang. The homework was still assigned. She was still the girl who sat in the back and got top marks. What had changed was inside, that the business card from Mr. Claiborne lived on her desk at home. It leaned against a small framed photo of her and her mother, taken on a beach when she was small. She didn't look at it often, but it was there, a physical whisper of the path not taken. The summer mentorship at the Renwick Conservatory. It sounded like a dream, and also like a terrifying return to a past that still carried the ache of loss. A week after the gala, her history teacher asked her to stay after class. The woman sat on the edge of her desk, her kind face serious. "I feel I owe you an apology, Elena," she said. "When Mrs. Albright was desperate, I mentioned you used to play. I never imagined it would lead to that. I hope it wasn't an unwelcome pressure." Elena shook her head. "It's okay. It just happened." "It certainly did," the teacher said with a warm laugh. "But what I wanted to say is this. You reminded me, and I think a lot of people, that we are all more than what we show every day. We contain multitudes. Don't let anyone, including yourself, put you back in a box labeled just the quiet one or just the bookworm. You've shown you're also the storm. And that's a magnificent thing to be." The words stayed with her. You are also the storm. She started visiting the school piano again, but not during the gala setup, and never when anyone else was around. She went in the early mornings, when the sun was just starting to paint stripes of gold across the empty auditorium seats. She didn't play Rachmaninoff. It felt too big, too connected to that one explosive night. Instead, she played simpler things. Old folk songs her mother had taught her. Pieces from her childhood that were just melodies, little stories without immense tragedy. At first, her hands felt stiff, the connection between her heart and her fingers still rusty. But slowly, something began to loosen. She wasn't playing to be a ghost or to be a brilliant spectacle. She was just playing for herself. And in that simple act, she found a middle ground she never knew existed. One such morning, about 3 weeks after the gala, she was picking out a gentle, melancholy tune by ear when she heard a soft cough. She jumped, her hands freezing above the keys. Mr. Dolan, the school's music teacher, was standing in the aisle. He was a tall, lean man with a perpetually thoughtful expression. He taught band and choir, and their paths had rarely crossed. "Please, don't stop," he said, his voice gentle. "That was lovely. A Russian folk song, yes?" Elena nodded, her heart still thumping. "My mother taught it to me." He walked down the aisle and sat in the front row, not too close. He didn't say anything for a while, just listened as she tentatively continued. When she finished, he spoke. "I heard you play at the gala," he said. "I was in the back, by the sound booth. I have to confess, I was one of the people who didn't pay much attention to the pachelbel." He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "And then you started the prelude, and I nearly dropped my punch cup." Elena managed a small smile back. "I've been wanting to talk to you," he continued. "Not to recruit you for jazz band or anything. Just to say, I understand what it is to have music tied to a person. My father was my first trumpet teacher. He passed when I was in college. For a year, I couldn't touch the instrument. The sound of it just hurt too much." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. She had always thought of him as just another teacher, part of the scenery. Now she saw the understanding in his eyes. He knew. "It's not that it hurts anymore," she said slowly, finding the words as she spoke them. "Not exactly. It's more like, I locked that room because the person I shared it with was gone, and opening the door felt like admitting she was really never coming back." Mr. Dolan nodded. "And now?" She looked at her hands on the keys. "Now, I think the room is still full of her, but it's also full of me. And maybe it's okay to go in there, and maybe even let someone else look in once in a while. That," Mr. Dolan said softly, "is a very wise thing." He stood up. "If you ever want a place to just play, without anyone listening, my room is open during my free period, 4th block. No expectations. No pressure. Just a piano in a quiet room." He began to walk away, then paused. "And for what it's worth, I think the Renwick program would be lucky to have you. But only if you want to go." Spring deepened, and the decision about the summer no longer felt like a looming cliff, but more like a door. A door she could choose to walk through, or not. She thought about it as she studied, as she walked home, as she played the gentle folk songs in the quiet mornings. One afternoon, she pulled out the box from the top of her closet. The box she hadn't opened since she was 13. It smelled faintly of old paper and wood. Inside were sheet music books, some with childish scribbles in the margins, a faded metronome, and a small porcelain figurine of a ballerina that used to sit on top of the piano at home. At the very bottom was a recital program. On the front, in her mother's flowing script, it read, "Asterisk for my Elena, who tells the most beautiful stories." Asterisk, she didn't cry. She just sat with the program in her hands, feeling the weight of the love in those words. It wasn't a sad weight. It was a grounding one. That evening, she sat at her desk with a plain sheet of paper. She didn't write to Mr. Claiborne. Not yet. Instead, she wrote a letter to her mother. She told her about the gala, about the fear, about the moment of defiance, about the thunderous chords and the silence that followed. She wrote about the business card, about the quiet mornings at the school piano, about the music teacher who understood. "I thought playing would mean losing you again," she wrote. Asterisk, but it didn't. It felt like finding a part of you I'd misplaced. A part that is also a part of me. I don't know if I'm ready for a conservatory, but I think I'm ready to stop being afraid of the music. I think I'm ready to tell stories again. Asterisk, she folded the letter and put it in the box with the program. She didn't need to send it. The act of writing it was enough. The next day, she took out Mr. Claiborne's card. She went to the school computer lab and typed a short, simple email. Asterisk, dear Mr. Claiborne. Asterisk, asterisk. Thank you for your kind words and the generous offer. I am interested in learning more about the summer mentorship program at Renwick. If it is still possible, I would like to apply. Sincerely, Elena Asterisk. She hovered the cursor over the send button. The girl who played Pachelbel's Canon would have closed the window. The girl who unleashed the storm took a deep breath and clicked dot as she walked out of the lab. She didn't feel a dramatic surge of destiny. She didn't hear triumphant music in her head. She just felt a sense of quiet rightness, like a book being placed gently on a shelf, ready to be read when the time was right. The story wasn't about a single brilliant night. It was about what happened after. It was about a girl learning that her quiet and her storm could live in the same house, and that her past and her future could finally start speaking to each other again, one simple, honest note at a time.